Alright, so you want to play Spell Tank? So recently I stumbled upon this really interesting tanking spec. It relies on some odd mechanics and interesting synergies, but after doing a bunch of testing and theory crafting, I've fallen in love with the spec and its identity. The spec is pretty unique, so I want to provide a quick overview so you can better understand how it works and see if it's the right spec for you to play. Alright, as a spell tank, your main focus is to generate threat through using spells, and the main spell my spec uses is Lightning Shield. I know, who the fuck uses Lightning Shield, right? But hear me out. I've actually found that Lightning Shield is one of my highest damages dealt in any instance I do, and this is purely for the fact that I can proc it so much. Lightning Shield will proc whenever I take damage, so as a tank, I'm naturally getting hit, so it'll naturally proc. But on top of that, I like to take the talent Static Shock. Static Shock allows Lightning Shield to proc from my ability damage or auto attacks, so as a tank, I deal damage with my abilities and I'm getting hit, so I'm double dipping on the proc chance. On top of all this, I run Purification by Light. This area allows my ability damage dealt to sometimes cast Exorcism or Consecration on the target. So whenever I proc Lightning Shield, it's considered ability damage, so it can proc Purification by Light. So by stacking all these effects, I can generate a stupid amount of threat. But it's also important to note, going super hard in the threat like this will also cause you to lose survivability. So while this spec can generate a ton of threat, it sacrifices a good deal of tankiness to do so. So that basically sums up the bare bones of this spec. Do keep in mind, Lightning Shield can be used in really any tanking spec, as it procs from ability and auto attack damage, so don't be afraid to experiment if you find yourself rolling different spells than me. But with that out of the way, timestamp should be on the screen now, and I'll start off with level 1 rolls. Your perfect level 1 start is Defensive Stance, Righteous Fury, Seal of Righteousness, and Lightning Shield. I would argue all of these spells are critical for your spec, as each of them play a key role in your threat generation and overall synergy. Therefore, I recommend you plan on playing a two-hander tank, as you can't really afford to pick up Shield Block, which is required for any shield tank. But if you're itching to play a shield tank, I would suggest you use a skill card on a seal spell, such as Command, Vengeance, Light, or Wisdom. Then you can replace Seal of Righteousness for Shield Block. But in my opinion, a better strategy would be to instead replace Seal of Righteousness with Judgment of Light. You can do this by rolling Seal of Righteousness, rolling for Judgment of Light, and then unlearning Seal of Righteousness. Doing this will guarantee you get a Judgment spell, which is huge for the spec. Now, I'll go for spells you're looking to roll leveling. So in my research, I found that there were a ton of amazing spells you could roll for this spec. So I'm going to separate my list into a high and mid tier. Starting off in the high tier, we have Thunderclap, Seal of Command, Holy Nova, Consecration, Holy Wrath, Judgment of Light / Wisdom, Rock Better Weapon, Mocking Blow, Deterrence, Evasion, Ghostly Strike, and Vigilance. Thunderclap is the core spell for really any non-form tanking spec, as it's super reliable and it's incredibly weighted with defensive stance, so you're pretty much guaranteed to get it. Seal of Command does amazing cleave damage, plus it scales with attack power. Holy Nova, Consecration, and Holy Wrath are all amazing AoE spells. Judgment of Light and Judgment of Wisdom are both fantastic range spells, plus the debuff they apply actually gives you threat for an added bonus. Rock Better Weapon is your best weapon enhancement, as it provides attack power, which you convert into spell power naturally. Mocking Blow, Deterrence, and Evasion are all great tanking CDs. Ghostly Strike is great passive mitigation, plus you can combo it with Riposte for 100% uptime. And finally, Vigilance is overall a great passive buff for your threat and threat reduction. Now, for mid-tier spells. In this tier we have Arcane Explosion, Seal of Vengeance, Seal of Light, Exorcism, Molten Armor, Frost Shock, Earth Shock, Flame Tongue Weapon, Frostbrand Weapon, Blessing of Sanctuary, Divine Protection, Barkskin, and Aspect of the Monkey. Arcane Explosion is a slight downgrade from Holy Nova. Seal of Vengeance and Seal of Light are both a worse Seal of Command. Exorcism is great, as it passively increases the damage of your legendary. Purification by Light. Molten Armor is a great Thorns effect. Frost and Earthshock are both a great range spell, and can substitute for Judgment if you don't happen to roll one. Flame Tongue and Frostbrand Weapon are both a good substitute for Rockbiter. Blessing of Sanctuary is nice for mana. Divine Protection and Barkskin are both good defensive CDs. And finally, Aspect of the Monkey is passive dodge, plus you can use 2 talent points to get 4% damage reduction. So that was a lot of spells, and there's still many more I neglected to mention, but I don't want to be here for another hour, so I'm going to move on to random enchants. The only legendary I suggest you consider for this spec is Purification by Light. Firstly, it deals holy damage, which if you didn't know has the highest magic threat multiplier with Righteous Fury, and on top of that, it has super high flexibility, as it works well in both AoE and single target encounters. Also, like I'd mentioned previously, this RE is procced from dealing damage with Lightning Shield, so not running this RE could seriously hinder your threat. Moving on to epics, I personally take Holy Retribution, Anemic, and Indomitable. Holy Retribution allows me to spam Holy Nova for a bunch of threat, Anemic keeps up my mana, and finally, Indomitable increases my healing received while Stagger is up, increasing my overall survivability. I personally would recommend every two-hander tank pick up Indomitable, as it's basically up 24/7 and requires no maintenance for free 10% healing. But as for Anemic and Holy Retribution, these REs are very flexible based on what you roll. Some good alternatives include Crackling Thunder, Blaze Ward, Natural Disaster, Jab Cross, Controlled Blast, Death or Glory, and finally, Bountiful Holy Wrath. For non-unique REs, I like to personally take Static Shock, Hasty Judgment of Light, improves shields, deflection, precision, and weapon expertise. I use Static Shock because it increases the proc chance of the talent and provides additional stacks of Lightning Shield. Hasty Judgment helps fill out my rotation, improves shields, increases the damage of Lightning Shield, deflection grants me 1% parry chance, increasing my overall tankiness, precision gives me 2% hit, and finally, weapon expertise gives me, well, expertise. This non-unique RE list is pretty solid regardless of what you roll. The only thing you may have to swap out is Hasty Judgment of Light. Instead of this, I would suggest you get one more weapon expertise and fill out your final slot with Anticipation. Alright, that does for REs, so now I'll go over talents. As a tank, your talent points are very important. Each talent point you spend must contribute to either threat, survival, or utility. Tanks may not have the most mechanically challenging role to play, but the build making process is incredibly strenuous. So with this in mind, I'll go over my talents and categorize them into either threat, survival, or utility. Starting off with threat, talents I take include Divine Strength, Improved Defensive Stance, Improved Judgments, Improved Righteous Fury, Improved Shields, Light's Vengeance, Mental Quickness, Reckoning, Static Shock, Unfair Advantage, and Weapon Expertise. Most of these talents are pretty self-explanatory, but there are a few I want to quickly go over. Static Shock, Mental Quickness, and Improved Righteous Fury are the core talents to this spec. Static Shock allows you to proc Lightning Shield consistently, Mental Quickness provides a significant amount of spell power, and finally, Improved Righteous Fury is functionally a flat 30% threat increase for most of your damage. Now on to survival talents. I like to take Adaptive Defense, Ardent Defender, Aspect Mastery, Deflection, Improved Defensive Stance, Improved Righteous Fury, Iron Will, Light's Vengeance, Reckoning, and Tactical Mastery. You may have noticed, but some of these talents are also listed under my threat section. This is mainly due to the fact that many taking talents tend to double dip in effects, usually providing both threat and survivability. The core talents in this section include Deflection, Iron Will, and Tactical Mastery. These talents are sort of self-explanatory. They simply provide any 200 tank with some powerful passive tanking effects. Last but not least, I'll go over utility talents. In this section we have Divine Strength, Enlightened Judgments, Improved Judgments, Spiritual Attunement, and Weapon Expertise. Two of these talents are here purely for utility, Enlightened Judgments and Spiritual Attunement. I like taking Enlightened Judgments as it grants me a ridiculous amount of range on my Judgment spell, and Spiritual Attunement helps me a ton for generating mana. Finally, I'll touch on my 1560 talented abilities. I personally run Dispersion, Pain Suppression, and Devastate. Dispersion is a great defensive CD as you can cast it while affected by most common CCs. Pain Suppression is another great defensive CD to have as it's very flexible, something I would consider mandatory really for any non-form tanking spec. And finally, I take Devastate as it deals super high threat and is a fantastic filler spell for my rotation. And that about does it for the guide. I really enjoyed making this spec and this guide, and I hope you find it as much fun to play as I do. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.